The sky above Kelvoria burned. Fire rained down as the XL-FAR warships continued their attack, reducing entire cities to ash. Buildings collapsed, and streets were littered with the bodies of the fallen. The once peaceful planet was dying. Lyric, a Kelvorian scientist, ran through the underground corridors of the last surviving research facility. His heart pounded in his chest. He had one chance, one last hope. The XL-FAR Dominion had invaded a month ago, crushing Kelvoria's defenses in days. The Kelvorians were a peaceful race, scholars and diplomats, not warriors. They had no weapons strong enough to fight back. The XL-FAR had promised mercy at first, demanding surrender, but those who surrendered were executed. Now, only a handful of Kelvorians remained, and Lyric knew that soon, they too would be gone. He reached the sealed chamber deep within the facility. Inside, a massive machine hummed with power, a forgotten relic from a time before the Kelvorians had abandoned war. A distress beacon. No one knew who built it. No one even knew if it worked. It had been buried for centuries, hidden beneath layers of secrecy. But the ancient warnings carved into the metal were clear. Activate only in the gravest hour. The Deathworlders will answer. Lyric had no choice but to believe in the legends. He slammed his palm against the control panel. The beacon's core flashed blue, pulsing with energy. A deep, ancient hum filled the chamber as the signal was sent, racing through space faster than light, past dead stars and forgotten battlefields. Somewhere, someone would hear it. Behind him, the facility's doors exploded inward. XL-FAR soldiers stormed in, their black armor gleaming in the dim light. Their leader, Commander Deathworlder, stepped forward, his reptilian face twisted in amusement. "You're too late, Kelvorian," Deathworlder hissed. His glowing red eyes scanned the room before locking onto the beacon. His expression changed. "What have you done?" Lyric stood tall. "I sent a call for help." Deathworlder's claws tightened around the hilt of his plasma blade. "No one is coming for you." Lyric allowed himself a small, bitter smile. "You don't know that." Deathworlder let out a low growl before raising his weapon. A sharp crack filled the air. Lyric barely registered the pain before his body hit the cold floor. He gasped, blood pooling around him, his vision fading. Deathworlder stood over him, watching as the life drained from his eyes. "Fool." The XL-FAR commander turned to his soldiers. "Shut it down. Destroy everything." But before his men could move, the beacon flashed again. This time, the entire facility shook. Deathworlder's eyes widened as the ancient machine emitted a low mechanical voice, one that had not spoken for centuries. "Distress signal received." The XL-FAR soldiers froze. Then something answered. A deep, terrible signal echoed across the stars. A signal so powerful it overloaded every XL-FAR communicator on the planet. Their ships flickered with interference. The sky itself seemed to darken as if something immense had turned its gaze toward them. Deathworlder felt fear for the first time in his life, because the signal had been heard, and the Deathworlders were coming. The void of space was silent. For centuries, the sector beyond the outer rim had been a dead zone. No ships passed through. No civilizations expanded into it. No messages were ever sent back. The galaxy had long believed it to be abandoned. But when the ancient distress beacon on Kelvoria activated, something deep in the darkness awakened. Aboard the TSS Revenant, a massive Terran dreadnought floating in the void, a red warning light flickered to life on the command console. Captain Elias Rourke opened his eyes. He had been sleeping, but now he felt something in his chest, a strange pull, an instinct he hadn't felt in decades. The control room hummed to life as the Revenant's AI, Valkyrie, spoke in a cold, mechanical voice. "Captain, we have received a priority distress signal." Rourke leaned forward. "Origin. Unknown world. Ancient Terran beacon. The signal is over 3,000 years old, yet it was activated just moments ago." Rourke frowned. That wasn't possible. The only beacons of that era had been part of Project Requiem, an emergency failsafe designed during humanity's last great war. They had been left behind when the Terran fleets vanished from the galaxy. No one should have been able to turn one on. The beacon signal pulsed again, and a fragment of a desperate message played through the speakers. A weak, trembling voice. Kelvorian. We are dying. The XL Far are here. Please, if anyone can hear this, help us. Rourke clenched his fists. The XL Far Dominion. He had heard of them. A ruthless empire of slavers and conquerors. The kind that had once tried to wipe out humanity itself. He exhaled slowly. How far? 3 jump cycles, 4.2 hours. A long silence filled the room. The bridge crew waited. Then Rourke stood, his voice steady. Wake the fleet. Across the void, hundreds of ancient warships, long thought to be lost, stirred to life. The unstoppable Deathworlder Armada had heard the call, and they were coming. The skies of Kelvoria were filled with fire. Zelfar warships hovered above the last surviving cities, raining destruction upon what little resistance remained. The Kelvorians had no weapons left, no armies, no hope. In the grand warship Bloodfang, Commander Veclor watched the devastation with cold amusement. Kelvoria was finished. His soldiers had found the distress beacon, but it no longer mattered. No one was coming to save these weaklings. The XL Far ruled this galaxy, and no empire, not even the fabled Deathworlders of old, could stop them. He turned to his second-in-command. Destroy the remaining settlements. I want no survivors. The officer nodded, moving to execute the order. Then the sky broke. A shockwave tore through the atmosphere as something massive emerged from the void. The XL Far Fleet scanners flickered with static, their systems overloading as the darkness of space rippled. And from it, they came. Colossal warships, black as the abyss, descended from hyperspace like gods of war. The largest among them, the Revenant, was a Terran dreadnought, a relic from an era when humans had ruled the stars with iron fists. More ships followed, hundreds, thousands, and each one was ready for war. On the surface, the Kelvorians looked to the sky in disbelief. What are those? A scientist whispered. Survivors gathered in the ruins, staring upward, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The legends had spoken of Deathworlders, of ancient warriors from a place where everything tried to kill you. Beasts, storms, even the planet itself. For centuries, the galaxy had believed that humanity was gone. Now the truth was clear. They had only been waiting. Inside the Revenant, Captain Elias Rourke stood at the command deck, staring at the enemy fleet. Open comms, he ordered. A signal pulsed through the void, forcing its way onto every Xelfar channel. Rourke's voice was calm, steady, unstoppable. This is Terran command. Surrender or be erased. The XL Far laughed at first. Then the first Terran warship opened fire, and the slaughter began. The first shot fired by the Deathworlders was not a warning. It was an execution. A Terran warship, nearly 3 times the size of the largest XL Far dreadnought, unleashed a single kinetic round, a solid slug of metal traveling at near-light speed. It ripped through the enemy flagship like paper. No shields, no armor, no chance. The Bloodfang, Commander Veclor's warship, lurched violently as debris from the destroyed vessel crashed into its hull. The bridge flickered with alarms as reports flooded in. The Korgoth is gone. They destroyed it in one shot. Veclor stared at the screens, his claws digging into his chair. His entire life, the XL Far Dominion had been the strongest force in the galaxy. Now, they were the prey. In orbit, the Terran fleet advanced. Their weapons were different. Not plasma, not energy beams, pure kinetic devastation. A single Terran dreadnought could fire massive railgun rounds capable of punching through planets. Now, they were aimed at the XL Far. One by one, the XL Far ships exploded, their fleets torn apart with terrifying precision. This was not a battle. It was a massacre. On the surface, the Kelvorians watched in stunned silence. For weeks, the XL-FAR had been unstoppable, their warships untouchable gods of destruction. Now, those same warships were burning in the sky. A Kelvorian elder whispered, "The Deathworlders have returned." Inside the Revenant, Captain Elias Work watched the destruction unfold. His expression did not change. There was no mercy in his eyes. The XL-FAR had spent centuries conquering, enslaving, and exterminating weaker species. They thought themselves the apex predators of the galaxy. They had forgotten what true predators looked like. Work's voice was cold as he gave the next order. Send in the ground teams. No survivors. The Deathworlders were not here to negotiate. They were here to end this war. The XL-FAR army had never known fear. For centuries, they had crushed civilizations, wiped out entire species, and enslaved the weak. No one had ever fought back and won. Until now. Until the Deathworlders arrived. The sky above Kelvoria was a funeral pyre. Terran warships rained destruction on the XL-FAR fleet, turning mighty battleships into floating wreckage. The once invincible Dominion Armada was being systematically annihilated. But the worst was yet to come. Because now, the humans were coming down. Kelvorian survivors huddled in the ruins, watching black metal dropships descend from the burning sky. Each ship, marked with the sigil of the Terran Expeditionary Force, moved with deadly precision, deploying shock troopers in exo-armor that gleamed under the firelit clouds. One Kelvorian, barely able to stand, whispered, "Are they here to help us?" An elder beside him shook his head. "No, they are here to destroy." The ground invasion began. The first XL-FAR battalion to encounter Terran infantry never got the chance to fire a shot. The Deathworlders moved too fast. Heavy boots slammed into the soil, armored soldiers moving like living weapons. They carried rail assault rifles, firing hypervelocity rounds that shredded XL-FAR warriors to pieces. Their armor was unbreakable, their movements ruthless. A XL-FAR warlord raised his plasma cannon, aiming at a group of human soldiers. He fired. But the plasma dissipated harmlessly against the Deathworlder's kinetic barrier. Then the Terran trooper ripped the warlord's head from his shoulders with his bare hands. It took less than an hour for the battlefield to turn into a slaughterhouse. The XL-FAR had spent centuries making others kneel. Now, they were the ones begging, and the Deathworlders did not listen. Inside the Bloodfang, Commander Veclor watched the battle unfold on his tactical display. His forces were being wiped out. Every ship, every ground unit, gone. His claws trembled. This wasn't just a war. This was retribution. And he knew humanity never forgave. He turned to his second-in-command. "Prepare the warp drive. We're retreating." But the officer's face was pale. His voice shook as he whispered, "Commander, we can't." Veclor's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" The officer pointed at the screen. A Terran battleship had maneuvered into position behind them. It was charging its main gun. Aboard the Revenant, Captain Elias Work watched the last of the enemy forces attempt to flee. His expression was unreadable. His voice, however, was absolute. Fire. The railgun discharge. A massive projectile, the size of a building, punched through the Bloodfang, obliterating it in an instant. Commander Veclor had enough time for one last thought. We should have left humanity alone. Then he was gone. Kelvoria was silent. The XL-FAR were no more. And across the burning world, the Deathworlders stood victorious. The battle was over. Kelvoria's sky, once darkened by XL-FAR warships, was now filled with the wreckage of their fallen empire. Fires burned across the landscape, smoke rising into the heavens like the funeral pyre of a doomed race. The Deathworlders had won, but they were not finished. Terran warships hovered ominously in orbit, their cannons still hot from battle. Dropships continued to land, unloading heavily armored soldiers who swept through the ruins, eliminating any surviving Selfar forces. There were no prisoners. The humans did not believe in mercy. In the shattered remains of Kelvoria's capital, a group of surviving Kelvorians gathered in fear. They had prayed for salvation. But as they watched the black-armored Terran soldiers march through the streets, they realized something. They had summoned more than just help. They had summoned the wrath of an ancient nightmare. A young Kelvorian girl clutched her mother's robe. "Will they leave now?" she whispered. The elder beside them, eyes filled with the weight of history, shook his head. "No," he murmured. "They do not leave until the work is done." Inside the Revenant, Captain Elias Work stood in silence, staring at the battlefield below. Valkyrie, the ship's AI, spoke in a calm voice. "All enemy forces neutralized. Kelvoria is secure." Work exhaled slowly. This was what humanity did best. They had not just defeated the Excelfar. They had eradicated them. But he knew the truth. The war was never truly over. There were still Excelfar colonies, still remnants of their empire hiding in the shadows, and the Deathworlders had only just begun their return. Rourke turned toward his officers, his voice steady. "Send a message to the galaxy." The communications officer nodded, opening a broad-frequency transmission. Across the void, every major empire, every surviving civilization, every world that had once feared the Excelfar heard the voice of humanity once more. "This is Terran Command. The Excelfar Dominion is no more. Their worlds will burn. Their name will be erased. To those who stand against us, know this. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Humanity has returned." Across the stars, countless races listened in silence. Some shook with relief. Others trembled in fear. Because the Deathworlders were no longer a myth. They were real, and they were watching. Kelvoria was silent. Not the fearful silence of oppression, nor the eerie quiet before an invasion. This was the silence of a world freed through fire and blood. The Excelfar were gone. But in their absence, a new fear had taken root. The Kelvorians had called for help, and the Deathworlders had answered. Now they wondered if they had summoned something even more dangerous. Across the ruins, Terran soldiers moved with cold efficiency. They were not celebrating. There were no cheers, no triumphant speeches, only the methodical elimination of Selfar survivors, the disposal of their war machines, and the securing of Kelvoria's skies. It was a grim ritual, one they had performed on countless worlds before. A Kelvorian scientist, Dr. Velos, watched from a distance, fear creeping into his bones. For weeks, his people had suffered under the Selfar's rule. They had been enslaved, tortured, left to die in the streets. Now their enemy had been destroyed so completely that not even their name would remain. And yet, as he watched the black-armored Terran soldiers patrol the ruins, he realized something terrifying. What if humanity did not leave? Inside the Revenant, Captain Elias Work sat in his chair, watching the planet below. The battle had been swift, too swift. Humanity's technology, their weapons, their tactics, it was overkill. The galaxy had grown soft in their absence. The Excelfar had believed themselves to be predators, but against humanity, they had been nothing more than cattle in a slaughterhouse. He exhaled. Casualties. Valkyrie, the AI, responded instantly. 0. Not a single Terran soldier was lost. Work clenched his jaw. War was supposed to have consequences. This was something else. This was extermination. Back on the surface, Kelvorians gathered as a Terran officer stepped forward. His armor was marked with the sigil of the Expeditionary Command, his presence carrying the weight of an empire that had once ruled the stars. His voice was calm, absolute. "Your world is free. The Excelfar will never return." A murmur of uncertainty passed through the crowd. A Kelvorian elder stepped forward. "And what of you, Deathworlder?" he asked cautiously. "Will you leave us be?" The officer stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not a kind smile. Not a reassuring one. A knowing one. That depends. Will you stand with us? Silence. Because in that moment, the Kelvorians understood. Humanity had not just returned for vengeance. They had returned to reclaim the galaxy. The war was over, but humanity was not finished. Kelvoria's skies were clear, the last remnants of Selfar forces wiped from existence. Their warships, once feared across the galaxy, were now nothing but debris floating in the void. Yet, despite their victory, the Deathworlders did not celebrate. Because this battle was only the beginning. Inside the Revenant, Captain Elias Work stood before a holographic star map. Red markers, Selfar strongholds, outposts, and hidden colonies littered the display. They had eradicated the enemy from Kelvoria. But millions of Selfar still lived, and Rourke had no intention of letting them escape. His voice was calm, absolute. Begin the hunt. The officers at the command table nodded without hesitation. There was no debate, no hesitation, no mercy. The Selfar Dominion would not survive, not even as a memory. On the surface, the Kelvorians gathered in uneasy silence. The Deathworlders had freed them, but what came next? A Kelvorian elder, his voice steady yet cautious, spoke. What happens to us now? A Terran officer, his armor dark as the void, gave him a single measured look. You have a choice. His voice was calm, but behind it was something heavy, unstoppable. You can stand alone, rebuild your world, and pray that another empire does not come for you. The Kelvorians shuddered. They had seen what happened to those who stood alone. Then the officer spoke again. Or you can stand with us. Silence. For the first time in centuries, the Kelvorians felt the weight of their own destiny. Across the galaxy, the signal from Terran command spread. Every empire, every race, every system that had once mocked the vanished Deathworlders. They all heard the message. The Selfar are gone. We are not. And we are coming. In the shadows of distant worlds, in the halls of powerful empires, in the dark corners of the universe, fear took root. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same again.